I want to talk about memory because that's important. I also want to talk about just like what use cases you were seeing. And I know we talked last week about, hey, where are people finding value with this? What's actually happening out there on the streets? I told you, shoot, man, like MCP is a great thing for people to give lip service to, but I have yet to actually see MCP servers running in production.
Yeah, man. Where to start? So we're seeing a lot, and we're really fortunate. We get to have a lot of conversations with people because it's such a hot topic. Um, I haven't yet met I haven't yet met a company with over 100 employees that's not trying to build something.
Mhm.
If they have any engineers on staff. And when you get to the really large organizations, like it's multiple teams, all just like building in parallel, seeing what sticks and what doesn't. It's really fascinating. It's like a Cambrian explosion
Yeah.
of ideas and agent development. And admittedly, like everything is so early, like a lot of these teams just aren't succeeding, right? And and it's a bunch of different things. But um, on the use case side, we're mostly seeing like two flavors of use cases. Um, but they look really similar. So at a high level, almost everything we see is people want to type in their intentions, what they want, and they want that to generate whatever the outcome is. And so if you think of Google search, like the reason why that dominated in the last, in the last generation of tech was because you would type in what you want and the Google search would just, give you the search results, the intent. If I'm oversimplifying this wave, it is just the next level of that. Instead of the agent giving you search results, it's giving you outcomes. And that's why Perplexity is so exciting, right? Why ChatGPT is so exciting,
Lovable.
lovable. And so people are looking for that type of, you know, in like expression of intent in natural language to outcome in a variety of different ways. And and so if we go down a level, they don't want to learn new UIs. So like point and click navigation, trying to find the right button and figuring out how to do this and that, sacrifice the chicken to figure out how to do it and read,
Can
the
I tell
go
you
through.
something real fast? That's 100% correct. Like I was playing around in Supabase and it was just like, why am I having to click around on the sidebar? Why can't I just say that I want this done and it gets done?
Yeah. Dude, go into a CRM again and you'll lose your mind, right? You're like, wait, what? Why am I doing any of this? Right.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what's happening. And so nobody wants to learn, your shitty UI anymore, right? They just want to express their intentions. They want your system to learn them as opposed to you learning them, which is a fascinating change. Um, and so when we see what's happening, there's like a fork. There are internal use cases and there are external use cases. And on the internal use case side, it's employee productivity. Like 99% of what we see is employee productivity. Yes, there are some background agents being built that are going to work autonomously, but those are like 1%. It's 99% is I'm an employee. I want to get something done. I want to talk or mostly type to something and have it happen. And there's a spectrum, right? Like on one end of the spectrum are people like Prosus who, have, Slackbot, and I can talk to that and interact with all our productivity systems and send an email or update a Jira ticket, et cetera. On the other end of the spectrum are much more verticalized uh, experiences. And so, there is a consumer packaged goods company, and they want their procurement person to be able to just order sugar, as part of the supply chain. But today, that's like a manual process across like 4 different SAP modules. And so they want the agent to just take that request and then just manage the SAP modules, right? Just go process the sugar order, which shouldn't be that complicated. Um, on the consumer side, it's a very similar concept, but there too, there's a bit of a spectrum on what we're seeing. Um, in the most obvious use case, it's I want to have a chat experience for my own app, the app I already have, and this is where a lot of SaaS, legacy SaaS companies are trying to modernize, which is really cool. And so I've got this complex product. I don't want people to have a learning curve. I want them to just type in, hey, go figure this thing out and it'll work. That's the obvious use case. We're seeing a lot of that. What we're also seeing, which is non-obvious, is we're trying to people try and abstract above the SaaS and create like more Uber agents that control multiple SaaS systems so that they become like the choke point, like an abstraction layer above. So, I'll make up an example. Like, let's say I wanted to build a sales agent. It would talk to like the CRM. It would talk to, the marketing system. It would talk to something like Clay. And so it's living above a layer above that. Now, some of the SaaS vendors themselves are trying to build those, and then there's a ton of startups trying to build those separately. So that's really interesting. And then the other customer-facing one, which is really interesting, is just making like a particular workflow that's very complicated a lot simpler. And so, we're talking to a large lender, a bank, and they have a loan application that's it's long and it's complicated and has an 85% drop off rate because, most people like aren't super financially literate, and these applications and forms ask for a lot of stuff that you just don't have handy. And so people don't understand what they're being asked, or they have to go check for stuff like asynchronously. So they leave the form and then they never come back. And so the prototype, was, hey, like, let's turn this into an agent. The person can ask questions and understand what the questions are. Like, hey, what does this thing even mean? But when
Wow,
it
nice.
needs to go get a form or some data, the agent can also hook into their email. It can hook into their Drive. They can go talk to their bank and auto pull all this stuff in the moment. And the idea is if you can even move the needle by 1, 2, or 3% completion rate for a really big lender, that's a material impact to the business. But all of it just comes back to people just having a better UI. The best UI is no UI. Uh, and so,
Dude, you know what that reminds me of?
yeah,
That little piece right there, or just everything you're saying is, did you ever see those back rubbers that kinda look like a spider, where it's
yeah,
got one ball and then it has a bunch of other balls that are connected to it?
yeah.
It's like, that's the visual I have. You have the one big ball that you're interacting with the user with, but then you have all these other small balls that it can go and connect with, and it can grab information, maybe it transforms it on the fly, hopefully, and then brings you back something that is useful.
Yeah, and that's exactly how like Shortwave uses this, right? It's a great email agent. I use it. I recommend it. Uh, and but it'll go talk to HubSpot. It'll go talk to Asana. It'll
Yeah.
go talk to Slack, and pull context as needed to go help me craft a better email. Um, so that's what we're seeing. And now, the MCP thing, the MCP questions are a fascinating one. So as you know, we're big believers in MCP. We're actively contributing to MCP. We have a big RFC that's currently in review. We hope it gets merged in the coming
Any
months.
day now.
Any day now, any day. But it's got broad support, so we're like, I think it's just a function of timing at this point. Um, but um, but you're right. Like a lot of people aren't yet successful with MCP, and I think there's a lot to that. I think the first one is, I think I think the hype around MCP drove a set of expectations for MCP that are so far ahead of what MCP is today that, it's probably the biggest headwind to MCP in my opinion, which is like crazy to even like say, but also just really unfair to the MCP team, right? They're doing fantastic work and everybody's like, 12 months out on the roadmap saying, well, I need this yesterday, right?
Mhm.
And so, like, I think the biggest challenge is like resetting people's expectations of what MCP is, what it's going to be and what it is today. I think part of it is that a lot of people were so excited to see the future of tool use and tool execution that they assume that MCP is like the panacea, like the solution to all of it. Like if we just adopt MCP, it's all just magically going to work. And that's not the point of MCP. Like MCP is the protocol. It is there to standardize how a large language model can do tool selection, and that tool selection be communicated to the back end to do tool execution. That's where we live, right? Arcade's a tool execution system. It's everything else still has to be built. Like, you still have to worry about security, performance, language model optimization, parameter prediction optimization. There's a ton of work that's nothing to do with MCP. And I think that's where people are getting really hung up and stuck. And so I think the place that we see people get stuck the most is around tool authorization. Um, it's okay. How do I prove that this agent on behalf of this user can access this resource and take that action? And so they end up spending weeks trying to figure out how to make it work, and then they ultimately like stall the project out. To quote Process at one point, it undermined the ROI of the project to try and figure this stuff out.
It was actually toxic
Yeah.
for our project.
Yeah, and similarly, like, we've talked to LangChain a ton about this, right? They were our first customer, and they had a tools community, and the workload was so significant for everyone involved, um, that they were excited to see that there were commercial options now available to just go tackle this stuff because it is gnarly, and then to give people all the SDKs and toolkits to go custom build their own things, above and beyond whatever's out of the box. Um, so I'm really bullish on MCP. I do think MCP is going to be like the new HTTP, for the interactions between like models doing tool selection and the backend services that are doing tool execution. And we're contributing as fast as we can to kind of bring it up to what we also believe it should be. But I think there's a long road to hoe for the ecosystem and the customers to catch up to their own expectations.
I like how you say it's not a silver bullet, and that expectation was there where it's like, just we'll MCP and then our shit will work. That did not happen. But also, you know which one I'm fascinated by that absolutely lost steam is agent to agent. It was like, what happened there?
Man, God. So I think there's a lot to it. Look, I don't work at Google. And so I don't really know what's going on over there, but I think there's a pattern I'm seeing with, with things coming out of Google where they release things that make a lot of sense. They're really smart. It can be exciting to see, and look at and be like, oh, that's cool. And then like, it just doesn't get the support and backing that it needs
Yeah.
to ever really have a big impact. And I think for A to A, I felt like that for sure happened, but I think it went one step further with A to A because like there was no major platform to hook it up to, right? Like with MCP, day one, you had Claude. And then you got Cursor and Windsurf, and that was it, right? Like lights out, it won. And A to A like never had that moment with anything because like nobody really uses like Gemini directly. It's not even like I'm an Android user, proud Android user. And I don't like the Gemini on my phone is not something that I use yet. It's not like wired into the Google ecosystem. So there's just a big user base around Gemini that can be that thing for A to A. And then there weren't other systems either that picked it up. And I think the third thing with A to A is that the promise of A to A, of like agents to agents communicating with each other, is a really exciting one. The problem is that MCP can also kind of solve that, right? And so there's this emerging trend that we're seeing that we're really excited about, where in some cases, the best way for an agent to communicate with another agent might be through a tool call. And if that's the case, MCP kind of fits.
Yeah. You don't need agent to agent for that to happen. That's so true.
Yeah. So, I'm not bullish on A to A yet, but you never know. And look, it's still early innings.
Yeah.
And so, is MCP going to be like the grand winner of the standards war? I don't know. We are investing heavily in MCP, but I'd be lying if I told you that I had a crystal ball.
Hmm. Yeah, it's weird to me how A to A just got donated right like that. It like came out, cool, great, boom, donated to Linux Foundation, and now what's going on, who's working on it, what's happening with it. You don't hear much, and
Well, yeah. So I'll get on a soapbox for a second. So, my first startup, company called Stormpath, like we came out of the Apache Software Foundation. So, we had an open source project called Apache Shiro that my co-founder Les Hazelwood had started. Really, really great project at the time. And there were a lot of hard lessons we learned about how to make a good, successful open source project. And the first one, the one that is like indelible in my mind, is there needs to be, a benevolent dictator for life on these projects. There needs to be someone. It's typically one person, but it might be more. It might be like, two or three, that is just like the steady hand on the wheel, strongly opinionated, and keeping the project moving forward in a way that makes sense and keeping away all the vendor interests that might bloat it.
that's the key.
And there are a ton of examples of where this has fallen down. My favorite example of a super hot project that just never made it was OpenStack back in the day. And they
Yeah.
were like, AWS got super hot, and then somebody, this team out of NASA, put out this open source project to go basically have an open source version of AWS. And it was the hottest thing ever. I mean, it was white hot. But it it was kind of like designed by committee. And then the thing got super bloated, and then it stopped moving forward fast enough, and then it eventually just died. Um, and so I'm a big believer in there just being a strongly opinionated leader on a project, like shepherding it and driving it forward and navigating just all the competing interests for it. So um, I don't know what'll happen to 8A now in the Linux Foundation. I think it's a good governance model, but if they don't have a benevolent dictator for life, I'll be skeptical. But the biggest thing is they have to find a platform that makes it do something at this point that is next level compared to MCP, because it can't be 10% better at this point. Like it's not enough. It's got to be like a whole generation ahead in order for anybody to care.
There's too many people that have committed too much to MCP to be like, oh, well, yeah, let's go and spend hours to figure out A to A.
Yeah. Dude, the amount of MCP projects that we see is wild. Now, the number of them that go to prod is near zero, but the number that are getting started is very high. It's fascinating.
Yeah. It goes back to that, like the lore that is captured in folks' mind is like, wow, MCP is going to do it for me. This is that thing that I needed to make sure my agent works. And then they find out real quick that,
Yeah. Again, I keep going back to the HTTP example. It's like, people just discovered HTTP. They're like, holy shit, the internet, right? Web, right? It's going to solve all our problems. And then they start like pulling on it and they realize, oh crap, I still need to build a website.
a lot more. Yeah.
I need to have servers, and I need to have login systems, and I need encryption, and like there's all this stuff I need. Damn you, Al Gore.
It was him who created the internet. Damn. So, well, I want to rewind real fast because you said something fascinating that I have been thinking about more and more, which was we like to type with our machines. And as much as voice is a hot thing and we talk about voice has its use cases and it has its value. But when it is us interacting with a UI, you are not bullish on us talking to the computer.
Yeah. So, the funny thing is I used to be very bullish on people talking to a computer because, so I have young kids, and, as a technologist, in with kids, we put the tech on the kids as fast as you can. Right. And so like all my kids have a Google Home in their rooms, and it's fascinating to watch them because my kids interact with technology and have been for years through natural language. And so you watch children and you can kind of predict the future of new interfaces. And my 14-year-old will see me typing on my phone and she'll call me a dinosaur, pull it out of my hands, and then she'll dictate. And so I think most of my kids don't know how to use a mouse, or, I think they know how to use a keyboard, but they barely know how to use a mouse. And they all know how to use touchscreen, but they all know natural language. They think Google's a voice, not like a search bar on a website. And so I was like, yeah, it's all go natural language voice. Let's go. And I find myself as, as I play with our own demos at Arcade that do awesome things like chat.arcade, which is wild. I'm always like, oh, I wish I could interact with this over voice. I talk to ChatGPT all the time in my car.
Yeah.
I wish it could do better tool calling so it could actually do things for me, like send an email or like track something. But it's a really great experience. Um, so then I started to go all in on voice. I have Super Whisper on my computer. Like, I try and do the whole Carpathy thing where like I talk to cursor. Uh, but then I found out that then the more I really got deeper and deeper into it, I found myself not using it as much. I found myself going back to typing. And I was like, why? Why am I doing that? One reason is that uh like its voice is is like socially is socially imposing on other people.
Mhm.
And so, if I'm sitting in the office and I've got a bunch of people around me, like, it's just like doesn't feel comfortable to just start talking to the computer because then you're kind of interrupting other people. But also other people's words get like caught in the transcription and then then you kind of like have to re-record and it kind of gets unergonomic, right? But more importantly, it's just kind of imposing on other people. Kind of like taking a phone call at your desk in an open layout, like you just wouldn't do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And then there are cases where, in particular with software development, where like you have to type something and like it's not going to get the word right, right? Like you would have to like teach it the words ahead of time, and you didn't do that because you're lazy, and so you're like, I'm just going to type this thing out. I know the thing I got to type, um, and so I think there's always going to be a place for people having some sort of non audible input. Now, is it keyboards? I don't know. But but I think voice is going to be a leg of the stool, but not the only one.
Yeah. I've done that so many times, especially when we both speak Spanish and English, and you're in English, and then it's like you try and say something in Spanish, and it does not pick that shit up. It's just like, never mind. Like, I'll type it.
Yeah, it forgets the ñ, and you've got a
Yeah.
very different word on your hands.
You got some awkward chats. That is for sure. Oh, dude, well, we'll end it there. This has been awesome, man. Our nice little ramblings, Friday thoughts on the agent space.
Awesome. Well, dude, good to see you, man. All right, we'll talk soon.